Part 1: Rodney Finley and Tanisha Finley. Rodney Finley was known online as Finny the Legend, a street live streamer whose channel was built on movement, spontaneity, and constant exposure to the public eye. He walked the Las Vegas Strip night after night, camera in hand, broadcasting the sounds, faces, and energy of the city in real time. His content had no script and no filter. What viewers saw was exactly what was happening at that moment. Beside him almost every time was his wife, Tanisha Finley. She was not a background figure. She spoke to viewers, responded to comments, and helped shape the tone of each live stream. Together, they presented themselves as a united presence, both on camera and off. Their streams created the illusion of closeness. Viewers felt like companions rather than spectators. The live format erased distance and replaced it with immediacy. But that same closeness also meant exposure. Every disagreement, every personal reaction, every emotional shift unfolded in front of an audience. Over time, Rodney became involved in a public and increasingly hostile conflict with another YouTuber, Manuel Ruiz, who used the name Sin City Manny Wise. The dispute began with accusations about copied content and copyright complaints. At first, it sounded like a familiar online disagreement, the kind that usually fades after a few heated exchanges. Instead, the conflict deepened. Live streams turned into battlegrounds. Insults replaced arguments. Personal attacks replaced discussions about content. Each side spoke directly to their audience, and the audience responded instantly. Comments poured in, taking sides, escalating the tone, encouraging confrontation. Silence was no longer an option. Backing down risked public humiliation. Every stream became a test of dominance in front of a crowd that demanded spectacle. Tanisha remained present throughout the conflict. She defended her husband, addressed critics, and absorbed the tension that surrounded the channel. The argument was no longer just between two creators. It became part of the channel's identity. Viewers tuned in not only for Las Vegas street scenes but to see what would happen next in the ongoing feud. The line between content and real life blurred until it was nearly impossible to tell where one ended and the other began. On a June night near the Bellagio fountains, Rodney and Tanisha went live as usual. The location was crowded, filled with tourists, performers, and flashing lights. The atmosphere was familiar, almost routine. The stream showed nothing out of the ordinary at first. Then Manuel Ruiz appeared in person. Not through a screen. Not through comments. He was physically there, confronting them in the same space where the live stream was happening. The encounter unfolded quickly. Voices rose. Tension spiked. Within moments, the situation escalated into violence in the middle of a public area. The live stream continued during the chaos. Viewers watching from around the world saw confusion, panic, and sudden silence where conversation had been seconds earlier. Rodney and Tanisha collapsed where they stood. Emergency responders arrived, but there was nothing they could do. Both were pronounced dead at the scene. The Las Vegas Strip was briefly shut down as authorities secured the area. Witnesses struggled to process what they had seen. Online viewers replayed fragments of the live stream, trying to understand how a familiar broadcast had turned into a final record of two lives ending. The same tool that built Rodney's channel had captured its last moments. Manuel Ruiz left the scene and later turned himself into authorities. He was formally charged with 2 counts related to the loss of life, involving the use of a dangerous weapon in a crowded public space. Investigators confirmed that neither Rodney nor Tanisha was armed. The focus of the case shifted toward the long digital trail that preceded the confrontation. Law enforcement collected an enormous amount of online material. Live stream recordings, archived videos, private messages, public comments, and years of online interaction were preserved and analyzed. The digital history showed how the conflict grew louder, more personal, and more public over time. What had once been entertainment now served as evidence. Every past statement was re-examined through a legal lens. Prosecutors argued that the actions created extreme risk to the public and demonstrated conscious decision-making. They announced their intention to pursue the most severe punishment allowed by law. The defense countered by arguing that the confrontation escalated rapidly and questioned intent. Both sides acknowledged the unprecedented scale of digital evidence involved, amounting to multiple terabytes of data. Because of the volume of material and the complexity of the case, the court scheduled proceedings for the following year. Preparation would take months. Analysts, lawyers, and investigators continued to comb through online archives, reconstructing a timeline built almost entirely from live streams and social media interactions. The deaths of Rodney and Tanisha Finley became more than a criminal case. They became a warning. A demonstration of how online conflict, fueled by audience reaction and public pressure, can leave the screen and enter the physical world with irreversible consequences. The live stream that once symbolized connection ultimately recorded destruction. What moment do you believe changed this conflict from online drama into real-world tragedy? Keep watching, because the next part exposes another case where digital anger crossed a fatal line. Part 2, Sakina Thompson. Sakina Thompson struggled to accept the end of a relationship that had already moved into the past. The breakup did not bring closure for her. Emotional attachment remained strong, and distance only intensified it. While her former partner moved forward, Sakina stayed mentally anchored to what she believed had been taken from her. The separation did not quiet her thoughts. It sharpened them. Kayla Hodgson entered the picture as a symbol of replacement. She was younger, living in another state, and building a new relationship with the man Sakina could not let go of. From Sakina's perspective, Kayla was not a stranger. She was an obstacle. Social media became the primary space where those feelings played out. Messages were sent. Replies came back at first. Over time, the responses slowed. Conversations that once felt alive became short, distant, and restrained. Then the communication stopped. A block on social media cut off all remaining access. No explanation. No argument. Just silence. For Sakina, the block was not a boundary. It was a rejection. It removed her ability to watch, to question, to insert herself. That single action carried more emotional weight than any insult. It confirmed that she no longer had a place in that life. Anger replaced longing. The feeling of being erased turned into something darker. Instead of fading, her fixation narrowed. The distance between New York and Florida no longer felt like protection. It became a challenge. Evidence later presented in court showed that what followed was not impulsive. Travel arrangements were made. Timing was considered. The trip south was deliberate. Sakina flew from New York to Florida with a specific destination in mind. She did not announce her arrival. She did not reach out. Surveillance footage later showed her wearing items meant to conceal her identity. A hat. Gloves. Clothing chosen to avoid recognition. These choices mattered. They suggested awareness. They suggested planning rather than confusion. On the morning of the incident, she went directly to Kayla Hodgson's apartment. There was no indication of hesitation. What happened inside was brief and violent. Kayla was unarmed. She did not survive the encounter. The confrontation ended with her losing her life inside her own home. What followed became critical to the case. Instead of seeking help, Sakina remained in the apartment. Evidence showed she changed into Kayla's clothes. She attempted to clean parts of the scene. These actions were not random. They showed an understanding of what had occurred and an effort to alter what would be found later. Each step added another layer to the narrative prosecutors would later present. After leaving the apartment, Sakina returned to New York. She resumed her routine. To people around her, nothing appeared different. But digital records told another story. Phone data. Flight information. Surveillance footage. All of it formed a timeline that contradicted any claim of confusion or loss of awareness. Investigators in Florida moved quickly. They identified Sakina as a suspect and coordinated with authorities in New York. She was arrested and later extradited to face charges. Prosecutors charged her with first-degree murder, citing premeditation, interstate travel, and actions taken after the death. During the trial, Sakina testified in her own defense. She claimed she lost control. She said she blacked out during the confrontation and could not fully remember what happened. She described fear and emotional overload. The defense attempted to frame the act as an explosion of feeling rather than a calculated decision. Prosecutors challenged that account methodically. They pointed to the plane ticket. The disguise. The early morning timing. The deliberate entry into the apartment. The choice to change clothes. The attempt to clean the scene. The decision to leave the state immediately afterward. Each detail weakened the idea of a blackout. Together, they formed a picture of intent. Jurors weighed emotion against evidence. In the end, they agreed with the prosecution. Sakina Thompson was found guilty of first-degree murder. The verdict reflected the conclusion that the act was planned, carried out with awareness, and followed by deliberate behavior to avoid responsibility. The sentence was life in prison without the possibility of parole. There would be no future review. No release date. The judgment closed the legal case but left lasting questions about how a digital action as simple as blocking someone could play a role in a fatal outcome. Some still debate whether the turning point was the block itself or everything that came before it. The next part reveals another case where words typed on a screen led to a meeting that ended in irreversible loss. Part 3, Gerald Parker. Gerald Parker was drawn into a public argument that began on Twitter and centered on music, identity, and pride. Rap culture places weight on reputation, and online platforms amplify every slight. A tweet mocking another young artist's music circulated quickly. The message did not exist in isolation. Friends contributed to its tone and encouraged its spread. Even if Gerald did not type every word himself, he embraced the message and defended it publicly. Ownership mattered more than authorship. The response was immediate. Insults came back sharper and louder. Screenshots traveled farther than the original post. What could have stayed as background noise became a challenge issued in front of an audience. Each reply invited another. Each retweet hardened positions. Pride replaced judgment. Backing down risked looking weak, and weakness felt unacceptable when watched by peers. The argument moved beyond the screen. Direct messages replaced public posts. The tone shifted from mockery to confrontation. A meeting was discussed and then agreed upon. The belief that settling things face to face would restore respect took hold. The idea carried danger, even if not everyone involved recognized it at the time. The location chosen was a parking lot in Indianapolis. Open space. Easy access. Neutral ground in theory. In reality, it became a pressure cooker. Other young people were nearby. The presence of witnesses raised the stakes. Voices were raised. Accusations continued. Online anger arrived intact and intensified by proximity. Tension escalated quickly. The argument no longer had the buffer of distance or time. A weapon appeared. The moment fractured everything that came before it. A single action ended the confrontation and began a crisis. Gerald Parker fell after being struck. The shock spread faster than the earlier tweets ever had. Emergency services responded. Gerald was transported to the hospital. Efforts were made to save him. He did not survive his injuries. News of his death reached family and friends who struggled to understand how a disagreement over music had led to a fatal outcome. Grief replaced bravado. Silence replaced posts. Police secured the scene and interviewed witnesses. Accounts varied in detail but aligned on the central facts. Investigators collected phone records, messages, and social media posts. The digital trail showed the progression from teasing to threats to an arranged meeting. What had been typed casually was now examined carefully. Devin Leggett was identified and arrested. Charges reflected the seriousness of the incident. As the case moved forward, prosecutors reviewed evidence and witness statements. The legal framing changed as facts were weighed. Intent, circumstance, and responsibility were debated. The case did not resolve quickly, and uncertainty lingered for those affected. Eventually, a plea was entered. Devin Leggett admitted responsibility for involuntary manslaughter and for carrying a handgun without a license. The sentence imposed was 6 years in prison. The resolution closed the courtroom chapter but did not answer the larger questions that followed the case. Gerald Parker's death forced a re-examination of how online interactions spill into real life. The distance of a screen can strip words of consequence while magnifying their reach. When pride is challenged publicly, the pressure to respond can override caution. The path from a tweet to a meeting can feel short and justified in the moment, even when it carries irreversible risk. Friends who once amplified the argument were left to reckon with their roles. Witnesses who saw the confrontation unfold carried memories they could not delete. Families faced loss that no verdict could undo. The platform that hosted the original exchange moved on to new content, while the consequences remained permanent for those involved. The case raised an uncomfortable question about where responsibility begins and ends. Is it with the person who types the insult, the friends who encourage it, the audience that applauds, or the individual who brings a weapon to settle a dispute? The answer is not simple, and that complexity is what keeps the story from fading. At what point do online words stop being jokes and start becoming real-world threats in your view? The next part examines a case where a live broadcast captured a moment that could never be taken back. Part 4, Earl Lee Johnson Jr. Earl Lee Johnson Jr. went live from Baton Rouge with a phone held steady enough to keep an audience watching. The setting appeared ordinary. A parked vehicle. A tense conversation. A voice speaking directly to viewers as if they were witnesses rather than strangers. The stream did not begin with chaos. It began with accusation. Johnson spoke about a debt connected to drugs, an amount he claimed was owed to him. He repeated the figure, framing the dispute as unresolved and personal. The camera stayed on. The audience grew. As the minutes passed, the tone sharpened. Johnson addressed the person beside him, Janice David, and spoke to the viewers at the same time. He accused her of planning to falsely accuse him of sexual assault. The allegation was spoken into the camera, preserved instantly, and delivered to hundreds of people watching in real time. The live stream became a stage where fear, anger, and blame overlapped. The broadcast continued for 16 minutes. During that time, comments flooded in. Viewers pleaded for the situation to stop. Others warned that authorities were being contacted. The comment stream reflected confusion turning into alarm. Many did not immediately understand that they were watching real harm unfold. The gap between screen and reality closed without warning. When the live stream ended, the video did not disappear. Clips circulated rapidly. People who had watched live shared what they saw with others. The situation reached law enforcement through a viewer who recognized the severity of what had happened. Officers connected the broadcast to a vehicle found later that day. Inside, Janice David was discovered deceased. The evidence indicated she had suffered fatal injuries. She was pronounced dead at the scene. What complicated the timeline was Johnson's status earlier that same day. He had already been taken into custody for an unrelated incident involving a stolen vehicle and a high-speed chase. At the time of that arrest, authorities were not yet aware of the death connected to the live stream. Only after the video spread and a witness contacted police did the separate events converge. Investigators reviewed the footage, phone records, and witness statements. The live stream became central evidence. Prosecutors emphasized that Johnson chose to activate the camera and speak throughout the incident. They argued that the decision to broadcast was intentional and meaningful. Turning on the camera, they said, showed a desire to be seen and heard. The act was framed as deliberate exposure rather than confusion. Johnson was formally charged with first-degree murder. The case drew national attention because of the role of social media. The courtroom repeatedly returned to the question of awareness. Prosecutors highlighted Johnson's speech during the broadcast. His statements appeared coherent. He responded to comments. He addressed accusations directly. In their view, this behavior demonstrated understanding of his actions rather than detachment from reality. The defense took a different path. Johnson's attorneys did not deny that he caused Janice David's death. Instead, they argued that he was not responsible due to severe mental impairment. They pointed to a prolonged period of substance use involving methamphetamine and heroin. According to the defense, this pattern had damaged his ability to think clearly or control his behavior. Expert witnesses spoke about addiction, intoxication, and their effects on perception and judgment. Prosecutors challenged the mental health defense. They focused on timing and behavior. They pointed to the structured nature of the live stream. They emphasized that Johnson spoke about consequences, addressed the audience, and reacted to events as they happened. These details, they argued, contradicted the idea of total loss of awareness. The jury listened to both sides and returned a verdict of guilty on the charge of first-degree murder. Sentencing followed months later. The judge imposed a sentence of 999 years in prison without the possibility of parole. The length of the sentence carried symbolic weight. It reflected the severity of the crime and the court's rejection of the defense argument. The decision ensured that Johnson would never be released. The case set a disturbing precedent. It demonstrated how live streaming can transform private conflict into public trauma. The camera did not prevent harm. It amplified it. The presence of viewers did not slow the moment. It intensified it. The broadcast preserved actions and words that could not be taken back, turning them into permanent evidence. For many observers, the most unsettling aspect was not the technology itself but the choice to use it. The live stream was not accidental. It was activated. Maintained. Addressed. The act of sharing became part of the event. The line between documentation and participation disappeared. Johnson's case became a reference point in discussions about social media responsibility. Platforms allow immediate reach without delay. There is no cooling off period. No editor. No barrier between impulse and exposure. When conflict enters that space, the consequences can spread faster than anyone can intervene. Janice David's death left a void that no sentence could fill. Her life ended while hundreds watched from afar, unable to intervene beyond typing words into a comment box. The case underscored a harsh reality. Digital audiences can witness harm without the power to stop it. The legacy of the case remains heavy. It stands as a warning about the dangers of mixing unresolved conflict, substance abuse, and live broadcasting. What begins as a stream can become a record of irreversible harm. Do you think the decision to go live changed the outcome, or would it have happened the same way without an audience? The next part explores a case where a teenage conflict online led to a meeting that ended a young life forever. Part 5, Kathleen Ber. Kathleen Ber was 16 years old when a personal conflict moved from private messages to a planned confrontation. The disagreement centered on a romantic triangle involving the father of a young child. Emotions ran high among teenagers who lacked distance from the situation and lacked tools to de-escalate it. Messages were exchanged rapidly. Screens filled with accusations, jealousy, and challenges. The dispute did not cool with time. It intensified as more people became aware of it. Social media posts spread the tension beyond the original participants. Friends read the messages, shared opinions, and took sides. What might once have been handled quietly became public. Each new message felt like pressure to respond. Silence appeared risky. Backing down looked like surrender. Pride took the place of judgment. A decision was made to meet in person. The meeting was not accidental. It was discussed ahead of time. Others knew where it would happen. The expectation was a physical fight, not a conversation. The location was chosen because it was familiar and accessible. Several people planned to be nearby, prepared to watch. The presence of witnesses raised the emotional stakes and reduced the chance of anyone walking away. Before leaving for the meeting, Kathleen brought a knife with her. This detail became central later. The decision to carry a weapon changed the nature of the encounter before it even began. It introduced the possibility of irreversible harm into what was framed as a teenage fight. That choice separated impulse from preparation. When the two young women met, shouting began immediately. The argument carried the same words that had been typed earlier, but louder and more aggressive. Physical contact followed. The confrontation escalated quickly. In the chaos, the knife was used. One strike caused a fatal injury. The fight ended abruptly, replaced by panic and confusion. Emergency responders were called. Efforts were made to save the injured girl. She did not survive. She was 18 years old and the mother of a small child. Her death stunned the community. Friends who had expected drama were confronted with loss. A gathering meant to prove toughness ended a life. Police arrived and secured the scene. The broken knife was found where the fight occurred. Witnesses gave statements describing the sequence of events. Investigators reviewed online activity connected to the dispute. Messages and posts showed how the argument developed and how the meeting was planned. These records removed doubt about whether the encounter had been spontaneous. After the incident, a post appeared on Facebook from Kathleen. In it, she expressed no remorse. The message shocked many who read it. For investigators and prosecutors, it provided insight into her state of mind after the event. The post became part of the evidence reviewed by the court. Despite being a minor, Kathleen was charged as an adult. Prosecutors argued that the seriousness of the act and the planning involved justified that decision. The case moved through the legal system with speed compared to others, driven by the clarity of the evidence. The presence of witnesses, the recovered weapon, and the digital trail left little room for ambiguity. Kathleen eventually pleaded guilty to third-degree murder. The plea acknowledged responsibility without the need for a lengthy trial. Sentencing followed months later. The court imposed a prison term ranging from 7 to 20 years. The sentence meant that Kathleen would spend much of her adult life incarcerated for an act committed at 16. During sentencing, the impact on the victim's family was addressed. The loss of a daughter and a young mother was permanent. A child would grow up without her. The court emphasized that choices made in moments of anger can carry consequences far beyond what anyone anticipates. The case raised difficult questions about youth, accountability, and prevention. Teenage brains are still developing. Impulse control is limited. Yet access to weapons and the influence of online audiences can accelerate situations beyond control. The planning occurred in plain sight through messages and posts, but Northwest effective intervention took place. For many observers, the most tragic element was how ordinary the beginning seemed. A dispute over relationships. Messages exchanged late at night. Friends watching from the sidelines. Nothing appeared unusual until it was too late. The transition from argument to fatal outcome happened within minutes, but it was built over days of online interaction. Kathleen's life trajectory changed permanently that night. So did the lives of everyone connected to the victim. A single decision made under pressure reshaped multiple futures. The case stands as a reminder that violence does not require long histories or complex motives. Sometimes it grows from familiar emotions combined with a single irreversible choice. Where do you think the moment of no return truly occurred in this story? The next part examines a case where online conflict among teenagers escalated beyond anything their families imagined. Part 6, Danica Troy. Danica Troy was a young teenager whose daily life revolved around school, friends, and a phone that rarely left her hand. Like many people her age, her relationships existed both in the real world and online. Arguments did not stay confined to hallways or classrooms. They followed her home through messages and social media apps. A disagreement with other teens began quietly but grew louder with every exchange. The messages became increasingly hostile. Insults replaced jokes. Threats replaced arguments. Screens captured words that were never meant to disappear. Blocking was attempted as a way to escape the conflict. Instead of ending the situation, it intensified it. The block was interpreted as a challenge rather than a boundary. The anger continued, now fueled by the idea of exclusion and retaliation. Communication shifted in tone. Friendly language was used to disguise harmful intent. Invitations were sent that sounded harmless on the surface. Danica was persuaded to leave her home under the belief that the tension could be resolved in person. The messages suggested conversation, understanding, and closure. Trust was exploited. She did not know that what awaited her had already been planned. When Danica failed to return home, concern set in quickly. Her absence was unusual. Family members contacted authorities, and a search began almost immediately. Friends, neighbors, and officers looked for any sign of where she might have gone. The urgency grew with every passing hour. The next day, her body was found in a wooded area. The discovery shocked the community. Investigators determined that she had been shot multiple times. After her death, efforts were made to destroy evidence by setting her body on fire. The attempt to conceal what happened added another layer of gravity to the case. The violence did not end with the act itself. It continued in the choices made afterward. Police focused their investigation on two other teenagers, both minors who knew Danica personally. They attended the same school. They shared the same digital spaces. Authorities stated that the meeting had been planned in advance and that Danica had been lured to the location through online communication. Messages and app data became central to understanding how the situation unfolded. The suspects were arrested and charged with premeditated murder. Prosecutors emphasized that the crime involved planning, deception, and coordination. The fact that everyone involved was so young made the case even more disturbing. Childhood disputes had escalated into a loss that could not be undone. Social media played a critical role at every stage. It provided the space where anger grew without interruption. It allowed plans to be made without adult awareness. It created a false sense of control and distance. The same tools meant for connection became instruments for harm. As investigators reconstructed the timeline, another troubling detail emerged. A man who discovered Denika's body did not immediately contact police. Instead, he left the scene and took her electric scooter. This delay interfered with the investigation and raised serious concerns about the preservation of evidence. Authorities later arrested him for failing to report the discovery and for removing property from the scene. His actions complicated an already devastating case. The issue of evidence concealment became central. Fire damage made forensic analysis more difficult. Time lost before authorities were notified allowed critical details to fade. Each decision after the crime created new obstacles for investigators and deepened the pain for Denika's family. Despite arrests and charges, questions remained. Investigators continued to examine the full motive behind the attack. Online arguments provided context, but they did not fully explain the level of violence involved. The case revealed how quickly digital conflict can disconnect young people from the reality of consequences. Denika's story exposed a dangerous pattern. Blocking, which is often recommended as a safety tool, failed when the conflict had already crossed a certain threshold. The digital world offered no refuge once anger became obsession. The screen did not protect her. It guided her into danger. For the community, the loss was profound. A 14-year-old girl was gone, not because of a long-standing feud, but because of messages exchanged in moments of immaturity and rage. Families questioned how such planning could happen without intervention. Schools reviewed their approaches to online conflict. Parents reconsidered how much they truly knew about their children's digital lives. The suspects faced the adult consequences of decisions made as teenagers. The legal process moved forward, but resolution did not bring closure. Motive remained a subject of debate. Was the crime driven by revenge, fear, status, or something deeper? The answers were incomplete. Denika Troy's case illustrated how online spaces can accelerate cruelty while hiding it from view. Words typed in seconds led to planning that ended a life. The distance created by screens removed empathy and replaced it with calculation. Once the plan moved offline, there was no turning back. Her name became a symbol of how fragile safety can be when digital conflict escapes containment. A simple block was no longer enough. By the time it was used, the danger had already taken shape. Where do you believe intervention could have stopped this chain of events before it reached the real world? The next part reveals a case where online hostility followed two people onto the road with deadly consequences. Part 7, Tori Lynn Emery. Tori Lynn Emery carried a long-running conflict into the open through Facebook. For months, her arguments with Danielle Booth played out in public view. The subject was a man they both knew, an incarcerated individual whose absence seemed to intensify emotions rather than calm them. Posts appeared regularly. Insults, accusations, and threats were visible to anyone scrolling through their feeds. What some readers treated as online drama was, in reality, a record of anger building without restraint. The exchanges did not fade with time. They hardened. Each post invited a response. Each response escalated the tone. Friends and strangers alike watched the hostility grow. At one point, Danielle Booth became frightened enough to contact police. She reported that Tori Lynn Emery had come to her home and made threats. That report marked a critical moment. It showed that the danger was already moving beyond words on a screen. Later that same day, Danielle Booth left her home with her friend Alicia Abernathy. Alicia was 21 years old and had no role in the online dispute. She was simply driving. They stopped at a McDonald's, unaware that the conflict was about to follow them into the street. Shortly after leaving the parking lot, they were spotted by Tori Lynn Emery. What followed was a pursuit that unfolded across public roads. Witnesses later described aggressive driving. Speed increased. Traffic surrounded them. The situation was chaotic and dangerous. Investigators concluded that Emery deliberately followed the vehicle carrying Booth and Abernathy. The chase was not accidental. It was fueled by months of unresolved hostility. During the pursuit, Emery rammed the other car multiple times. Each impact made it harder for Alicia Abernathy to maintain control. The vehicle was pushed through intersections and into increasing danger. The road became an extension of the online conflict, with vehicles replacing words and momentum replacing messages. The chase ended in a violent collision. Alicia Abernathy's car entered an intersection and struck another vehicle. The impact was severe. Alicia suffered fatal injuries and died as a result of the crash. Danielle Booth survived but sustained serious injuries and lasting trauma. Alicia had never exchanged a message with Emery. She had never taken part in the argument. Her death was the consequence of being present at the wrong moment in someone else's feud. Police arrived and began piecing together what had happened. Witness statements described the chase and the repeated impacts. Vehicle damage supported those accounts. Investigators reviewed the Facebook posts that documented the history of the dispute. The posts showed a pattern of threats and escalating hostility that explained how the encounter on the road became so extreme. Another disturbing detail emerged. Emery's young child was inside her vehicle during the pursuit. The presence of a child underscored the recklessness of the situation and added weight to the charges that followed. Authorities made it clear that the actions on the road placed multiple lives at risk. Tori Lynn Emery was arrested and charged with serious offenses, including second-degree murder and assault. Prosecutors argued that using a vehicle in that manner demonstrated intent and disregard for human life. The online posts were not treated as background noise. They were used to establish motive and state of mind. As the case progressed, a plea agreement was reached. Emery entered a no-contest plea to second-degree murder and assault. In exchange, certain charges were dropped. The agreement avoided a lengthy trial but did not lessen the gravity of the outcome. The focus remained on the loss of Alicia Abernathy and the injuries suffered by Danielle Booth. Sentencing followed. The judge spoke about responsibility and the dangers of allowing anger to control actions. A vehicle, the court noted, can become a deadly weapon when used deliberately. Emery received a prison sentence ranging from 18 to 60 years. The length reflected both punishment and protection of the public. For Alicia Abernathy's family, the sentence did not bring closure. Their daughter and sister was gone, taken by a conflict she never chose to enter. In court, the reality of that loss was clear. A life ended because two other people could not disengage from an argument that began online. The case illustrated how social media disputes can escape containment. What begins as typing on a screen can evolve into real-world confrontation when pride and resentment are left unchecked. The public nature of the posts added pressure, transforming private anger into a performance that demanded escalation. It also raised questions about accountability beyond the individuals directly involved. Friends who encouraged the feud. Viewers who watched without intervening. Platforms that hosted months of threats without interruption. Each played a small role in allowing the conflict to grow. The road where Alicia Abernathy died was not chosen for confrontation. It became dangerous because unresolved online hostility followed two vehicles into traffic. The transition from post to pursuit happened without pause. There was no moment where the situation reset or cooled. Once the chase began, the outcome was beyond control. Tori Lynn Emery's case remains a stark example of how quickly anger can turn lethal when combined with mobility and momentum. A disagreement that might once have ended with blocked accounts instead ended with a fatal crash. The difference was not the intensity of feeling but the decision to act on it in the physical world. Which moment in this chain of events do you think made the outcome impossible to prevent? The next part examines a case where a teenage argument on social media ended with an unintended victim losing her life. Part 8, India Martin. India Martin was a teenage girl walking home from school in a neighborhood where students crossed paths every day. Her name became known not because of something she posted, but because she was caught in the path of a conflict that did not start with her. The argument began on Facebook among a group of teenage girls. The topic was personal. Emotions escalated quickly. Messages multiplied. Screenshots spread. The dispute gained an audience before it ever reached the street. The plan that formed was not complex. A fight after school. Shouting. Physical confrontation. This kind of encounter was familiar in the neighborhood and often ended with bruises, embarrassment, and social consequences online. No one expected a weapon. The intention, according to later testimony, was to settle the argument with fists, not to end a life. Students gathered after classes ended. Tension was visible. Voices were raised. Phones were out. The conflict moved from typed words to physical presence. During the chaos, a firearm appeared. The shift was sudden. Panic replaced bravado. Control disappeared. One of the girls involved had access to the weapon, despite her age. India Martin was not the intended target. She stood nearby as events unfolded. In the confusion, the weapon discharged. India was struck from behind. She collapsed in the street. Emergency responders were called, but her injuries were fatal. She was taken to the hospital and later pronounced dead. She had not sent the messages that fueled the argument. She had not agreed to fight. She was simply there. The shooter was also a minor. Her name was withheld due to her age. The case was handled within the juvenile justice system, which carries strict limits regardless of outcome. Prosecutors acknowledged the seriousness of the loss but were bound by the framework designed for youth offenders. The maximum consequences available did not reflect the permanence of what had occurred. The legal process focused on responsibility and access. Investigators traced how the weapon reached the scene. A man later identified as Donald Flora admitted that he brought the firearm. He claimed it was meant for protection, not use. He stated that he instructed that it be handed to an adult rather than used by a teenager. That instruction was not followed. The weapon changed hands during the confusion and ended up in the wrong place at the wrong time. The teenage shooter was sentenced to juvenile custody for a limited term. Under state law, she could not be held beyond early adulthood. The sentence reflected rehabilitation rather than punishment. For India Martin's family, the outcome felt incomplete. A life had ended, yet the legal system moved toward eventual release. Donald Flora faced his own legal path. He was initially sentenced to a lengthy prison term for his role in supplying the weapon. Appeals followed. Convictions were overturned and restructured. Eventually, he accepted a plea related to conspiracy. His sentence was reduced, and years later he was released on parole. The legal shifts were difficult for the community to understand. Each change reopened wounds. Another individual, Vanetta Redwood, was accused early in the process of assisting or encouraging the confrontation. Courts later cleared her of responsibility. No charges remained. The legal record narrowed the blame but did not erase the outcome. India Martin's death left lasting effects. Her family grieved publicly and privately. Friends struggled with guilt and fear. Schools reviewed safety measures. Parents questioned how online arguments could transform into street tragedies so quickly. The community confronted the reality that a plan for a simple fight had created irreversible loss. The case highlighted the limits of the juvenile justice system. Laws designed to protect young offenders can clash with public expectations when the result is fatal. Rehabilitation and accountability do not always align in the eyes of those affected. The system followed its rules, but the emotional impact extended far beyond the courtroom. Social media remained central to understanding the chain of events. Facebook messages created momentum. Public posts built pressure. An audience formed before anyone stepped outside. The digital space amplified emotions and removed hesitation. By the time students met in person, the conflict carried the weight of public expectation. India Martin became a symbol of unintended consequence. She was not part of the argument that mattered online. She did not carry the weapon. Yet she paid the highest price. Her story exposed how easily bystanders can become victims when conflicts escalate beyond their original participants. Years passed, but the effects did not fade. Legal outcomes concluded. Sentences were served. Releases occurred. The absence remained. India's name continued to appear in conversations about youth violence, online disputes, and access to weapons. Her death became a reference point for what can happen when plans go wrong and boundaries disappear. The case forced a difficult question into public view. When everyone involved is young, who bears responsibility for preventing disaster? Parents. Schools. Platforms. The law. The answer remains fragmented, much like the events that led to India Martin's death. Which decision in this story do you believe changed everything, even though it seemed small at the time? The next part follows another online dispute where anger crossed the street and claimed a life that was never meant to be taken. Part 9. Zaria Kadia Carr. Zaria Kadia Carr lived much of her life online. Her presence on Facebook was constant, personal, and emotional. When tension rose inside her marriage, the platform became a window into what was happening behind closed doors. On the day her life ended, she went live from inside her home. The video did not present calm discussion. It showed fear, frustration, and strain. Her voice carried urgency. Her words suggested she felt unsafe. Viewers could sense that the situation was unstable. Earlier that same day, Zaria had posted a short message asking for help. The message was brief but direct. It hinted at distress and uncertainty. Friends and followers saw it and reacted with concern. Some encouraged her to leave. Others urged her to contact authorities. The message stood as a warning that something was already wrong before the live stream began. During the Facebook live broadcast, Zaria argued with her husband, Shamarcus Jamil Carr. Their exchange was tense and emotional. Comments appeared rapidly as people watched. Some pleaded for calm. Others asked if she was in danger. The live stream placed private conflict into public view. There was no pause button. No filter. Everything unfolded as it happened. The broadcast ended without resolution. What viewers saw online was only part of the story. Later that day, police were called to the home. Officers arrived and found Zaria dead inside. She had suffered fatal injuries. She was pronounced dead at the scene. The house that had been a background for live streams became a place of loss. Authorities immediately identified her husband as the primary person of interest. He was no longer at the residence. A search began across nearby areas. Law enforcement issued alerts and tracked a vehicle connected to him. The case escalated quickly as concern grew that he might attempt to flee. That same night, officers located the vehicle in another county. When they attempted to make contact, Shamarcus Jamil Carr died from a self-inflicted injury. Officials confirmed that he was the only suspect in Zaria's death. With his death, the case reached an abrupt end. There would be no arrest. No trial. No courtroom testimony. The full explanation of what happened inside the home would never be heard in court. Days later, investigators released additional findings. Medical examination revealed that Zaria had been physically assaulted before she was killed. This detail changed the public understanding of the timeline. The violence did not begin at the moment of her death. It had started earlier, during the argument that viewers partially witnessed online. The live stream was not the beginning. It was a snapshot of a situation already in motion. The revelation intensified conversations around the case. Many questioned whether earlier intervention could have altered the outcome. The warning signs had been visible. A public plea for help. A live stream showing distress. A pattern of escalating tension. Yet the transition from warning to tragedy was swift. Zaria's death left 2 children without parents. She and Shamarcus shared young children, including a newborn. In a single day, those children lost both their mother and their father. Family members stepped in to provide care while also processing their own grief. The consequences extended beyond the couple involved. An entire family structure collapsed overnight. The case became a powerful example of how domestic conflict can intersect with social media. Platforms allow people to share their lives instantly, but they do not provide protection. Viewers can watch and react, but they cannot intervene physically. Concern expressed through comments does not stop harm. The audience becomes a witness without agency. For some viewers, the live stream felt like a cry for help. For others, it was confusing and incomplete. Many did not realize the severity of the danger until it was too late. The gap between seeing and saving became painfully clear. Digital visibility did not equal safety. Authorities faced difficult questions. How should law enforcement respond to live broadcasts that suggest immediate risk? What responsibility do platforms have when users display signs of danger? How can families and communities act faster when warnings appear online? The case offered no simple answers. Zaria Kadia Carr was remembered by followers as a devoted mother and an active online presence. Her content had built a sense of connection with thousands of people. That connection became haunting when her final hours were partially shared with the public. The live stream preserved emotions that could not be undone. The absence of a trial left unresolved questions. Motive, sequence, and intent remained partially obscured. Investigators pieced together what they could from evidence, statements, and medical findings. Still, the complete story remained fragmented. Closure was limited. The broader impact of the case extended beyond one household. It highlighted how domestic violence can unfold in plain sight without immediate intervention. It showed how quickly situations can escalate once control is lost. It demonstrated that public exposure does not necessarily bring protection. Zaria's story continues to be referenced in discussions about online safety and domestic conflict. Her final live stream is often described as a warning that arrived moments before disaster. The tragedy underscored how fragile safety can be when fear meets isolation, even with an audience watching. The children left behind became a reminder that the consequences of violence ripple outward. They will grow up with questions that have no answers and a history shaped by a moment they could not understand. The public attention faded, but the loss remained. The case stands as a cautionary account of how technology can document danger without preventing it. A live stream can reveal truth, but it cannot stop harm once it has begun. Zaria Kadia Carr's death showed the limits of visibility in the face of violence. Do you believe the live stream was a warning that could have changed the outcome, or was the situation already beyond control? The next part examines a case where a meeting arranged through messages led to a fatal betrayal. Part 10, Oliver A.L.I. Stevens. Oliver Stevens was known to friends as Ollie. He was young, trusting, and deeply immersed in the same digital spaces as his peers. Disagreements unfolded through Snapchat and private group chats where tone can change quickly and intent is easy to misread. Messages circulated about rumors and perceived slights. Words were repeated and reframed. Screenshots were shared. The dispute did not remain contained. It gathered momentum as more voices joined in. A promise was made that everything could be settled by talking it out. The language used in messages suggested calm and resolution. The idea of meeting in person was presented as a way to end the tension. Ollie believed the meeting would bring clarity. Trust guided his decision. He left home expecting conversation, not confrontation. The location chosen was Bugs Bottom Field, a quiet open space close to where he lived. The field felt neutral. Familiar. Safe. A 14-year-old girl played a central role in guiding Ollie there. She communicated with him directly and reassured him that the meeting would be peaceful. Her involvement shaped his expectations and lowered his guard. Ollie did not know that others were already waiting. The plan had been arranged without his knowledge. When he arrived, the situation shifted immediately. The encounter turned hostile. He was attacked and suffered multiple injuries. Emergency services were contacted later, but the harm had already been done. Ollie did not survive. He was 13 years old. The news sent shock through the community. Parents struggled to understand how a meeting framed as a conversation could end this way. Friends revisited their messages, searching for signs they missed. The field became a place of mourning. Flowers appeared. Notes were left. The silence felt heavier than any argument that came before. Police moved quickly due to the seriousness of the incident and the ages involved. Phones were collected. Messages were reviewed carefully. Chats revealed planning. The idea of a simple talk was exposed as a deception. Evidence showed coordination and intent among those who carried out the attack. 2 boys were arrested and charged. Because they were minors, their names were protected. The case moved through the youth justice system, where procedures differ from adult courts but consequences remain severe. The 14-year-old girl who lured Ollie to the field was also charged for her role. Investigators concluded that without her involvement, Ollie would not have gone to the location. During the trial, messages were presented to show how the plan developed. Words that once felt casual took on new meaning in court. The sequence of communication established how trust was built and then exploited. The defense and prosecution focused on intent, participation, and responsibility. The court examined not only actions at the field but also the digital trail that led there. Verdicts followed. The 2 boys who carried out the attack were found guilty. Sentences were imposed within the framework of youth detention, with minimum terms reflecting the gravity of the loss. The girl who facilitated the meeting was convicted of a lesser offense related to her role. Her sentence was later increased on appeal. Judges emphasized that participation does not require physical action to carry serious consequences. The case highlighted how easily online communication can be weaponized. Private messages create a sense of safety that can be manipulated. Group chats can normalize harmful plans. Promises of peace can mask intent. The distance of a screen reduces hesitation while increasing coordination. Ali's parents faced a grief that offered no clear answers. They spoke of a child who trusted others and believed words meant what they said. The knowledge that messages were used to guide him into danger was especially painful. The digital record preserved the path to loss with a clarity that felt unforgiving. Schools and local authorities reviewed their approaches to online disputes. The case became a reference point in discussions about safeguarding, trust, and intervention. Parents questioned how much oversight was possible when conversations move rapidly across apps designed to disappear. The role of the girl who lured Ali sparked debate. Some viewed her as manipulated by others. Others focused on her responsibility for deception. The court concluded that her actions mattered because they enabled the encounter. The ruling sent a message that facilitating harm through communication carries weight, even without direct violence. Ali's story underscores the danger of believing that online conflict can always be resolved offline. The promise of a conversation can be used as a tool. Familiar places can become unsafe. Trust can be turned against those who offer it freely. The messages that led to Bugs Bottom Field were brief. Their impact was permanent. The case remains a reminder that intent can hide behind reassuring words and friendly emojis. When plans move from chat to meeting, the risk changes instantly. The loss of Oliver "Ali" Stevens continues to shape conversations about youth safety in digital spaces. His name is remembered not for the argument that preceded his death, but for the vulnerability that made him believe the meeting would bring peace. Which message in this story do you think most clearly crossed the line from misunderstanding to danger? The next part explores how online rivalry between youth groups escalated into a planned attack with lasting consequences. Part 11, Liko Steed. Liko Steed was a teenager growing up in an environment where identity, reputation, and survival often overlapped. Music was not only entertainment. It was a signal. Drill rap videos uploaded to YouTube became a way for rival youth groups to communicate threats, mock losses, and assert dominance. Lyrics carried names, locations, and challenges. Each upload invited a response. Views became validation. Silence was interpreted as weakness. The videos did not exist alone. Snapchat messages followed. Short clips, voice notes, and private chats reinforced what the public videos implied. Insults sharpened. Taunts became personal. The digital space turned into a battlefield where young people measured status through humiliation and fear. Screens created distance, but they also created speed. Decisions were made quickly, without reflection. Liko was drawn into this environment through messages that appeared casual. A conversation. A chance to calm things down. A meeting suggested as neutral. A 15-year-old girl played a key role in guiding him. She contacted him through Snapchat and encouraged him to come to a local park. The tone was reassuring. The intent was not. Trust was used as leverage. The park was familiar ground. Open space. Daylight. Nothing about it suggested danger. Liko arrived believing he would meet someone to talk. Instead, he walked into an ambush. Several youths were already waiting. The attack was sudden and coordinated. There was no argument. No chance to retreat. The violence unfolded quickly and decisively. Despite severe injuries, Liko managed to escape the immediate area. He ran, bleeding, searching for help. He reached a nearby house and knocked on the door. Residents called emergency services. Paramedics arrived and rushed him to the hospital. Doctors fought to save his life. For days, his condition remained critical. Hope flickered and faded. 5 days after the attack, Liko Steed died from his injuries. His death confirmed what many feared. The conflict was not symbolic. It was real. A digital rivalry had translated into physical harm. The community reacted with shock and anger. Families demanded answers. Friends struggled to understand how music videos and messages had led to a fatal outcome. Police launched a major investigation. Phones were seized. Messages were recovered. Videos were reviewed frame by frame. Investigators made it clear that the attack was planned. The drill music videos were not background noise. They were catalysts. Each lyric and post escalated pressure to respond. Social media had not merely reflected violence. It had shaped it. Multiple suspects were arrested. The case involved collective responsibility. No single person acted alone. Roles varied, but intent was shared. Some participated directly. Others facilitated. The girl who lured Liko to the park was also charged. Her messages were essential to the plan. Without them, the meeting would not have happened. Court proceedings revealed the structure behind the chaos. The youths involved were tried and sentenced according to their roles. 2 were found guilty of murder. Others were convicted of manslaughter. The total prison sentences amounted to decades. Judges emphasized planning, coordination, and shared responsibility. The verdict sent a clear message that group action does not dilute accountability. The case exposed how social media can function as a tool of warfare among young people. Platforms designed for expression became channels for intimidation. Videos acted as public declarations. Messages served as orders and confirmations. The digital trail documented escalation with brutal clarity. For Liko's family, the legal outcomes did not bring peace. Their son had been lured under false pretenses and attacked by multiple people. The knowledge that his final days were spent fighting for life deepened their grief. The park where he was ambushed became a symbol of betrayal rather than community. The broader impact extended beyond one case. Authorities and researchers pointed to the role of online content in accelerating violence. Drill music was not blamed as a genre, but its use as a vehicle for threats was examined closely. When lyrics name rivals and glorify harm, the line between art and incitement blurs. Schools and youth organizations faced hard questions. How to intervene when conflict unfolds online. How to monitor spaces that change daily. How to reach young people who see violence as a path to respect. There were no easy solutions. The speed of digital communication outpaced traditional safeguards. Liko Steed's death illustrated a grim pattern. Online rivalry creates pressure. Pressure demands response. Response moves offline. Once that transition happens, control is lost. Group dynamics amplify risk. Responsibility spreads but consequences concentrate on victims. The messages that led Liko to the park were brief. Their impact was permanent. The videos that fueled the feud remained online, viewed thousands of times, long after the funeral. The contrast between digital permanence and human fragility was stark. This case remains a warning about how social media can escalate conflict beyond intention. When platforms reward attention and outrage, young people can mistake visibility for power. The cost is measured not in views but in lives altered forever. Where do you think the digital conflict crossed the point where words became weapons? The next part uncovers a case where constant online posting may have made a young woman dangerously visible in the real world. Part 12, Gakira K.I. Barnes. Gakira Barnes lived in a world where violence was not abstract. It was nearby, familiar, and constant. On Twitter, she wrote about it daily. Her account functioned like a living journal, capturing fear, grief, anger, and resilience in real time. She tweeted about friends who had been hurt or lost. She tweeted about rival groups. She tweeted about streets, blocks, and moments that shaped her days. For many who followed her, the feed felt raw and unfiltered, a window into life under pressure. Her online presence grew quickly. Thousands followed her posts, not because they were polished, but because they were immediate. She did not write with distance or hindsight. She wrote as things happened. When something occurred in her neighborhood, her reaction appeared online almost instantly. That speed created authenticity. It also created exposure. Researchers later examined her account closely. Thousands of tweets were collected and analyzed to understand patterns of online behavior connected to real-world conflict. The findings showed shifts in tone tied to events around her. After incidents involving people she knew, her messages became more intense. Language hardened. Emotions sharpened. Public expression mirrored private stress. Her visibility brought attention from many directions. Journalists followed her account. Academics studied it. Law enforcement monitored it. Online reputation began to shape offline perception. Rumors circulated. Police at one point considered her a possible suspect in a prior incident involving a rival. That suspicion was never tested in court. She was never arrested. She was never charged. No judge or jury ruled against her. Still, the idea followed her. The distinction mattered. Online narratives often blur lines between accusation and proof. A reputation can solidify without legal confirmation. In environments where trust is fragile, perception carries weight. Gakira's tweets became part of how others interpreted her role in ongoing disputes, regardless of what the law established. Her account also revealed something else. She often posted details about where she was or where she was going. These posts were not intended as signals. They were expressions of normal life shared with an audience she felt connected to. But public location sharing carries risk, especially in places where conflict is active and watching eyes are many. On the day she died, Gakira Barnes was 17 years old. She was walking near a housing complex in her neighborhood. Shots were fired. She was struck and died at the scene. Witnesses later suggested that more than one person may have been involved. Investigators believed the incident was connected to ongoing local disputes. No one was immediately brought to trial for her death. News of her passing spread quickly. Many learned about it through the same platform where they had followed her life. Tweets she posted shortly before her death were revisited. Screenshots circulated. The contrast between her voice and her absence was stark. A feed that once updated constantly went silent. The response was complicated. Some mourned her openly. Others debated her role in the environment she lived in. The absence of convictions left space for speculation. Without court conclusions, narratives multiplied. Her name became part of larger conversations about youth, violence, and online presence. Academics continued to reference her account as a case study. They pointed out how social media can amplify risk by making emotions and locations visible. Public expression can invite reaction, and reaction can escalate. The research did not claim that tweeting causes harm. It highlighted how visibility interacts with existing danger. Her story offered no simple moral. She was not a caricature. She was a teenager navigating a difficult reality with the tools available to her. Twitter gave her a voice when other outlets were limited. It also placed her in constant view. The same platform that allowed her to be heard may have made her easier to find. Law enforcement acknowledged that public posts can sometimes expose individuals to increased risk, particularly in neighborhoods where conflicts are ongoing. Timing matters. Location matters. Emotion shared publicly can be read by unintended audiences. Once posted, control is lost. Gakira Barnes became a symbol of this tension. Expression versus safety. Visibility versus vulnerability. Connection versus exposure. Her tweets showed courage and honesty. They also revealed how thin the line can be between sharing and oversharing in volatile environments. Her death added to a long list of young lives lost to street violence. What made her case different was the digital record she left behind. Thousands of messages remained, frozen in time, offering insight but no closure. The archive became both a memorial and a warning. Families in similar communities recognized the pattern. Young people use social media to process fear and grief. They document their lives because silence feels heavier. Yet every post carries unintended consequences. The audience is never as limited as it feels. Gakira's story continues to be cited in discussions about online safety, youth culture, and responsibility. It forces uncomfortable questions. How much should young people share? How can platforms protect without silencing? How can communities reduce risk when danger is already present? There was no final tweet explaining what happened. No last message designed to be read that way. Meaning was assigned after the fact by those left behind. The interpretation of her words changed once she was gone. Her life cannot be reduced to her online presence, yet her online presence offers lessons that remain relevant. Public emotion can connect, but it can also attract attention that is not benign. Location sharing feels harmless until it is not. Visibility is power, but it is also exposure. Kakira Barnes was more than a case study. She was a person whose voice was loud because her world demanded it. Her story remains unresolved, suspended between research, memory, and loss. Which of her online choices do you think carried the greatest unseen risk in the real world? Stay with the story, because reflecting on this final case may change how you see every post that comes next.